And I won't back down. Hey, baby, there ain't no easy way out. Tonight's episode is brought to you by Dinesh D'Souza's new movie, The Dragon's Prophecy, based on the #1 international bestseller by Jonathan Cahn. The Dragon's Prophecy offers new understanding on Israel, radical Islam, anti-Semitism, and biblical prophecy. Could it be that the fate of the world, of all of humanity itself, is tied to what we're now seeing happen in the Middle East? In theaters 2 nights only, October 6th and October 8th, streaming and DVDs available October 9th. All tickets and pre-orders at thedragonsprophecyfilm.com. Hey everybody, thanks so much for joining us right here on The Right View. We're going to start tonight with checking out a few clips. Maybe you've seen these videos out there, maybe you haven't. I haven't seen any of them, so this is my first time, but let's see what we got here. Clip number 1. Here we go.
I went into Election Day thinking you were going to win.
Yeah.
So did you.
Yeah, I did.
So, I mean, it was a very tight race, but ultimately, if you have to pin it down to one thing, what was the primary reason, do you think, that you lost?
There are many factors, I think, that played into the outcome of that election. But I think probably one of the biggest in my mind is we just didn't have enough time.
You didn't have enough
time. We didn't have enough time.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, let me just clear something up for everybody. There was zero that was close about this election. Donald Trump won all 7 swing states. He won the popular vote for the first time in 20 years, and obviously the electoral vote. I think he had 312 electoral votes. Zero that was close about it, Kamala. Somebody told her that. See, this is the thing I don't understand about Kamala Harris. People, I think, just tell her stuff, and then she runs with it. And I don't know that there's any kind of investigation on her end. People can give me information, but you know what I do? I'm like, let me just clarify that, because if I'm going to go on television and talk about it, I need to at least have some foundation outside of just somebody telling me for what I'm about to go out and say. I don't know that she does that. And more time, the more we saw of Kamala Harris, the worse she looked to everyone, because it became very apparent she was way over her head on this whole thing, that she had absolutely no idea what to do as president. And my God, imagine she became president. Imagine that the whole thing is just, it's a lot. But you know what? That's the View. That they're going to take her on like that, and they're going to give her that ability to talk about it. Nothing close. I think President Trump has reiterated that as well. But you don't have to take my word for it or the president's word for it. You can just go look at the numbers and see it wasn't close at all, not by a mile. But good luck to Kamala if she's running with that. All right. See the next one.
Arrest guys! Arrest guys! Arrest guys! Arrest guys! Shoot ICE! Shoot ICE! Shoot the fucker! Shoot the fucker!
All right, first of all, this is disgusting. This is some sort of a crazy ICE protest. Arrest ICE. ICE is doing the job of enforcing the laws. This is the problem that these people have absolutely no idea what they're talking about, obviously. There are laws on the books that say that if you come to this country illegally, then you have broken our laws, and that we should have every right to deport you and send you out of this country. We have to have at least some kind of rules, people. These people just want us to it be a free-for-all. You don't have to get upset with the ICE agents. They're just doing the job of enforcing the law. If you're upset with the laws, go lobby Congress. Go talk to your member of Congress and wherever the heck you are, and tell them, you know what, we want an amendment. We got to change some laws. We got to, just open the floodgates, let them all in. I guarantee you that's not going to happen. But that's who you need to take it up with. And shoot ICE? Are you guys serious? This is the problem right now, is that it's become so commonplace for people to just kind of become unhinged and say crazy stuff like that. And I assume some of these people actually mean it. But this is why you have a Dallas ICE facility being shot up. This is why President Trump is sending, the military into Portland, because this kind of stuff continues to happen. These men and women are out there trying to do a job, and they're thank God we have them. They're doing a thankless task. You've seen 1,000% increase in assaults on ICE agents around the country. because of this nonsense. Because, and by the way, the accountability from the Democrat Party is zero on this as well, and they ought to be ashamed of themselves. They have perpetuated this. The mainstream media and legacy media has perpetuated this and has done nothing to say, like, hey, let's bring the temperature down on, like, hostilely accosting and getting, ICE agents injured and the whole thing. It's crazy. But I'm not surprised that, you have these lunatics out there. They're emboldened. They love to, make a clip like that, put it on social media. But it's disgraceful, and it's why people are getting hurt and people are going to be killed if we're not careful. Okay, let's see what else we got.
Autocracies now outnumber democracies for the first time in 20 years. Nearly 3/4 of the world's population today lives under autocratic regimes. In too many countries, including, sadly, right here in the United States, democracy is under siege.
Well, she would know a thing about democracy being under siege. I'm going to take you back to the 2016 election. Remember how much momentum Bernie Sanders had? By all accounts, Bernie Sanders probably should have been the Democrats' nominee, but what did they do? The same thing that the Democrats did this election cycle. They just kind of said, you know what? We don't really care about what our constituents want, about our voters. We're just going to push the person forward who we want to see in there. They did it with Kamala Harris. Don't forget, subverting democracy. Democracy is when we all participate in the process. We go out and we vote the people we want to represent us into these offices, whether it's, a state level, whether it's a federal level, House, Senate, President of the United States. So Hillary Clinton would know about that because they certainly plugged her right in, despite Bernie Sanders having much bigger crowds and a lot more enthusiasm, it seemed, behind him. You know why? Because it was Hillary's time. It was time. It was time for her. The insinuation that in some way, I assume it has anything to do with President Trump is, of course, insane and ridiculous. But she knows that already. What does the Clinton Global Initiative do? Anybody? I have no idea what their goals are, what their job is. It says they've been going for 20 years in that video. I would like somebody to tell me exactly what they do, where the money goes, and how that is all kind of tied up with the Clintons. What happens there? I think the people of Haiti found out that maybe they're not all they're cracked up to be. But I digress. So yeah, Hillary would know about that. But President Trump obviously is not doing anything near that. She can take her autocratic talk and send it elsewhere. Okay, last one.
Well, I believe that one of the reasons Donald Trump wants to send troops into American cities is because he wants to be able to take control of the 2026 elections. Remember that back in 2020, he and Michael Flynn, the former general and former advisor to the president, talked about actually taking control of the ballot boxes in 2020 because they didn't trust the outcome of the election. Now, if they've got troops in cities and it becomes a kind of norm for people, then it won't be abnormal for them when they're going to vote having troops at the ballot boxes. He'll say that he's protecting the ballot. And if he thinks there's some kind of fraud, and what I mean by that is if he thinks that his party isn't going to win, then they very well could do what they suggested they were going to do in 2020, which is take control of the ballot boxes.
Okay, well, J.B. Pritzker, I mean, who thought this guy was going to be rational and reasonable by any account? Of course he's not. The reason President Trump wants to send troops to Chicago, maybe someone ought to tell the governor of the state there, is because it is a hellhole in Chicago. People are the murders are through the roof. The violent crime is through the roof. And somebody's got to do something about it. Brandon Johnson hasn't done anything. J.B. Pritzker hasn't done anything. So President Trump is saying, hey, you guys aren't doing anything. I guess I have to step in and do it for you. Check out Washington, D.C. You saw the crime levels were sky high until Donald Trump came in, federalized the law enforcement there, made sure that everything got cleaned up. And the people who live there are the ones who are the most grateful because they are finally able to have their lives back. We want to do the same thing for people in Chicago. And by the way, while we're talking about elections, Pritzker, let me just say this. For the first time in a long time, this past election cycle, people finally had faith that their vote mattered and their vote counted. We had to work really hard for that. Maybe these people ought to look themselves in the mirror and ask why we got to a place in America where people felt like that maybe it wasn't even worth them going out and voting. It is so foundational for our country to have faith in our electoral process, and a lot of people for a long time didn't. We had a free, fair, and transparent election in 2024, and guess what? Donald Trump became president by an overwhelming margin. And guess what else? Republicans are in control of the House and the Senate. So I don't know what kind of hot garbage that was he was talking about. It sounds to me like the Democrats are getting a little bit worried as we head into the midterms because their party is in free fall. They have absolutely no leader. They have no true direction, platform, any idea that any American person could really get behind at this point outside of hating Donald Trump. So having to concoct that whole thing you just heard there, I guess, is the new way they're going to do it. Say that Donald Trump somehow wants to cheat in an election. No. We've seen that show before. We've seen people cheat in elections. It was the 2020 election. I don't know why you need ballots in suitcases. I don't know why they would be in a truck that's overturned on the highway. I don't know why cats who've been dead for years are voting in our elections unless there is fraud. And there has been fraud in the past, a lot of it. No more, not in 2024. And we certainly don't want to see it in 2026. We want free, fair, and transparent elections. Tonight, we're joined by senior editor for the Daily Caller, Amber Duke, as well as writer and podcast host at the Mom Wars Substack, Bethany Mandel. Amber and Bethany, welcome to the show. We continue to see such violence perpetrated against ICE officers. These are men and women who are out there, Amber, doing the job of enforcing the law. I always say if people have a problem with what the law is, then they shouldn't be taking it up with the ICE agents. They should be taking it up with Congress, and maybe they can get the law changed. But we saw, of course, last week there was a shooter at an ICE facility in Texas, and there was a handwritten note that this shooter left. So there was no ambiguity in terms of what this person's intention was. The handwritten note said, hopefully this will give ICE agents real terror to think, is there a sniper with AP armor-piercing rounds on that roof? Now, I assume this guy's goal was to attack ICE agents and I assume kill ICE agents. I don't know. These were very significant bullets he was using. But the victims of his attack were 3 detained migrants, one of whom is dead, the other 2 left in critical condition. It feels like that we have come to this place, Amber, where people are just kind of like, this is just an acceptable thing to some random person to go do because the mainstream media and Democrats have consistently attacked ICE, their agents, the entire agency, and the deportations. We've seen 2 million of them thus far during President Trump's second term in office. And it seems like no one is willing to step out and say, like, hey, maybe we shouldn't be doing this sort of thing. But tragically, now you have 1 migrant who's dead and 2 who are critically injured.
Yes, and polls show consistently that left-wing people are far more comfortable with justifying political violence than people on the right wing of the political spectrum. We have seen consistently massive protests at ICE facilities. Even after this attempted massacre of ICE agents, there were people outside of a separate facility blocking the transport vehicles for ICE officers. And we still see Democrats calling for unmasking ICE agents so that they can be doxxed, followed to their homes, and potentially attacked. And a group of Democrats are now fundraising off of this attack by blaming Trump because it was detainees who happened to be killed, completely leaving out the fact that the motivation from this individual was a targeted attack on the actual law enforcement officials, not the detainees. So there is a consistent justification and downplaying of an increasingly charged, violent atmosphere for people who are simply trying to do their jobs.
It's so tragic, Bethany. The bullets were inscribed. Had something written on them that said anti-ICE. There no question what this guy's goal was. And apparently, the ICE sniper did multiple searches of Charlie Kirk's murder and the video of that before the shooting. So very clearly he was inspired by that lunatic, that absolute monster who took Charlie Kirk's life, and I guess was trying to replicate it. You know, we see this sort of thing happen. You see the copycats come out, and I think a lot of us in the wake of Charlie's death said, I hope no one tries to do copycat, but here we are. This guy obviously did. And according to the FBI director, Kash Patel, he says that all the info they found so far indicates a high degree of pre-attack planning. So this wasn't just some spur-of-the-moment thing. This guy knew exactly what he was doing. He was setting up on a roof to kill ICE agents in the same style that Charlie Kirk was murdered. It's outrageous.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a response to the rhetoric that we're seeing. The number of times that I've seen and heard ICE agents called members of the Gestapo, it's all part of the framework in which Donald Trump is a Nazi, and anyone who works with him, even if it's, you know, a functionary part of their job and they worked the same job 5 years ago under Joseph Biden, they therefore become part of the problem, and they become legitimate targets in the minds of these psychotic people. But they are being driven on by members of the Democratic Party, you know, from the top on down, who portray our president as a fascist. And you follow the logic train. If the president is a fascist, then, you know, by any means necessary do you stop him and his functionaries. When we saw the assassination of Charlie Kirk, that should have been a signal to Democrats to stop this kind of rhetoric. And it didn't stop them. They continued doing it almost instantly. And so this is an extension of what they've been saying for the past, 8 years now, since the first term.
Yeah, well, and you're right. They absolutely have. And it's so crazy to me that, to your point, Bethany, they've just continued with this narrative. I think over the weekend I saw some very substantial Democrats saying that exact thing, calling people who were in the administration these horrific names like that. And you're right. If you are a true Nazi, if you are a true fascist, if you are truly Adolf Hitler, you're a horrible person. But that's the whole point, Amber, of all of that sort of characterization of people, is it obviously is meant to incite a certain physical response from people. Like, you hear that and you're like, oh, those people are terrible. Yeah, they're terrible. Yeah, racists are terrible. Yeah, Nazis are terrible. None of us are any of those things, though, and I think that it's such a dangerous space that we're existing in. I actually thought, erroneously, clearly, that in the wake of Charlie's assassination, that you would have at least one major Democrat, somebody who could maybe be the leader of this party, because we know they're totally rudderless. They have no idea who they are, who their leadership is, nothing, to come out and say, like, enough is enough. We got here and a man is dead because of the way we have characterized people with whom we disagree politically. But no one did that, Amber. Not a single one of them had the guts to come out and do that. And I still can't figure out why. If the shoe was on the other foot, I think that you would have many prominent Republicans coming out and saying, like, hey, we've got to tone it down. This is crazy. This can't happen. We can't just have people losing their lives because of this. But unfortunately, it seems like it's now just sort of normalized, and maybe people aren't even thinking twice about, acting out on it.
The left just wants to deny any responsibility or connection between the things that they've been saying and the psychotic reaction of their supporters. And really, it's been an escalation from the beginnings of woke culture back in 2010 and 2011, when they started labeling speech that they disagreed with as hate speech. There was this movement on college campuses to say that people who use speech that offended you or that you disagreed with actually could cause a physical reaction in the listener, to the point that they would be triggered, they could have PTSD, they had to have safe spaces and trigger warnings to protect themselves from that speech. And of course, if you paint speech itself as violent, as something that can cause a physical reaction, then you have created the permission structure for people to respond to that speech with actual physical violence and have it justified under the banner of self-defense. We've now escalated to a point where it's not just the speech that is offensive or possibly harmful, but the speaker themselves being labeled a fascist or a Nazi now means anything that they say is justified by a violent reaction.
Well, and speaking of prominent Democrats coming out and saying these things, I mentioned that over the weekend that it happened. here you go. The Governor Newsom press office X profile. So I'm going to go ahead and assume that Gavin Newsom knows all about this, or maybe posted it himself. Stephen Miller is a fascist, in all caps, Bethany, is what this says. And then the next one says, many people are saying that submissive Stephen, SS, of course, that is supposed to represent one of the kind of top tier people in the Nazi party, SS. That's what that's referencing. Miller is throwing the biggest, most pathetic tantrum in the entire West Wing, crying, stomping, wailing, our quotas, our arrests of children. How will we survive without raiding the innocent? His tantrum was so loud it triggered a small earthquake in San Francisco. Scientists are calling it the Miller quake. He is furious that I, Gavin C. Newsom, the real leader of America, just signed beautiful new laws to hold Trump's secret police accountable. No masks, no raids in schools and hospitals. Kids, teachers, nurses are safe again because of me. SS Miller is now grounded. No juice box, no cartoons. When you're ready to stop terrorizing Americans, Stephen, your daddy, me, might unground you. Until then, it's time out. You are welcome, America. GCN. Okay, I've never heard something crazier than that. And it also seems like, Bethany, that this was written to mimic a Donald Trump post.
No, 100%. And that's his entire social media presence, is him trying to mimic Donald Trump. But he doesn't actually understand that the president writes those messages himself.
Yes.
That's you couldn't make those in a lab. It's just Trump. And when you're trying to replicate that by someone who doesn't understand the ethos of Donald Trump or the appeal of Donald Trump, it comes off as really terrifyingly psychotic. And what bothers me is, first of all, Stephen Miller's Jewish, and they're accusing him of being a member of the SS. I can't imagine anything more repulsive than that. But number two, I saw videos of people writing similar messages outside of the home of the Millers, where they live with their children. That is a threat to their safety. And when we saw the videos of people in shock outside the sidewalk of the Miller home immediately before Charlie was murdered, and then when you think back at that, that should have signaled to people like, whoa, 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 this is going too far. Standing outside of someone's home where their children are present, that is a step too far. And not only on the wake of that and Charlie did they decide, you know, we're not gonna zero in on Stephen Miller as an individual and target him personally. They decided, let's up the ante. Let's be even more threatening and even more repulsive. And I don't know how you can see it any other way. They want the same thing to happen to Stephen Miller that happened to Charlie Kirk at his home with his children present.
It's terrifying. You know, I spoke with Katie Miller recently, and she was telling me how frightening this has all been, that they're no longer going to live in their house because of this. And Gavin Newsom is out there spewing this crazy stuff. You're exactly right, Bethany. People out there need to learn something. You aren't Donald Trump. You can't fake it. The American people want authenticity. That's why it works. You can't be him. So stop trying to be him. And the whole narrative there. I had to do multiple triple checks of this, because I was like, was this written like a Babylon Bee? Was this like a joke? No, this is a real post from a real X account. It is absolutely insane. And you're right. I think, sadly, that's the goal, that they want the same thing to happen to Stephen Miller. For what? For working alongside this president, Amber, for being a person who stands up in the face of this lunacy and says, no, we're enforcing the law. We're actually doing what the past administration failed to do. And that was, of course, to the detriment of our entire country. I don't get it. I've known Stephen Miller for a long time. I actually think he is a very nice guy. I think he's a very hard worker. I think he cares about this country a lot. And sadly, we've settled in a place where just weeks after we saw somebody who was, such a change agent, such a huge force in our political world, and now we know in the faith world as well, Charlie Kirk assassinated in cold blood, in basically for the entire world to see. We're now at a place where they're saying this kind of stuff about Stephen Miller, and not just anyone, a sitting governor of the state of California.
What is so disturbing, I think, about this too, is that the majority of the American people voted for Trump's immigration agenda It was one of his most popular parts of his policy platform.
Yes.
And even today, polls show that among his supporters, immigration is the issue area that they are most satisfied with. So they're not just attacking Stephen Miller, they're not just attacking the president, they are actually attacking a significant portion of their fellow Americans. And if this is the kind of contempt and hatred with which Governor Gavin Newsom and other top Democrats have towards their own constituent base, towards the other half of the country, then I fear we're in a very, very dark place.
I find it rather unbelievable that was posted, but maybe I need to start just kind of assuming the worst of a lot of people who are on the other side of the aisle. If Gavin Newsom wants to run for president, which I think a lot of us assume is like his goal ultimately, as far as I'm concerned, that just disqualified him. I don't know how you run for president after you posted something like that. I mean, a lot of things should disqualify him, but at the very least, that's the end for me. We did have some interesting news last week when it came to former FBI Director James Comey, who we all know was finally indicted by a grand jury on 2 counts, alleged false statements within jurisdiction of the legislative branch and obstruction of congressional proceedings. So this goes all the way back, Bethany, to back when he was FBI Director, and he was giving testimony about the original Trump-Russia collusion nonsense called Crossfire Hurricane within the FBI. And he apparently gave some bad information he knew was false in some of that testimony. The indictment alleges Comey made a false statement when he stated he did not authorize someone at the FBI to be an anonymous source, according to this indictment. And he failed to disclose sensitive information, which is also a big violation. So, look, there are people on the left who are saying, oh, this is just President Trump getting revenge on James Comey. This guy clearly did a lot that was messy and disgusting and anti-American and went against what I think most of us would expect an FBI director to do. It seems like he was doing everything other than actually operating the FBI as a stand-up agency that's protecting Americans. It seems like a lot of what he was doing was very political. And then when you go out and you you lie to Congress, you perjure yourself like that, I don't know what to tell you. The statute of limitations runs out on this today, which is September 30th. There's a 5-year mark from the day that this testimony was given. And so, there had to be some movement, I guess, if they want accountability. And I think at the very end of this, at the base of all of this, Bethany, is that we need accountability when people actually have broken the law, when they've done things that are illegal and it has damaged an agency like the FBI to the extent that it is now. We got to bring that back somehow. And this maybe is a great step. At least a grand jury felt like it was worth indicting him.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my favorite part about the left's response to this, by the way, was when they said how unprecedented it was that lawfare was used in this way. And I'm like, I feel like I remember something that happened in New York during the election. Was that like a fever dream? It sometimes feels like I'm living in an alternate universe from people on the left, because they thought that was completely within bounds and that was completely normal, and they had to make up things and make up laws that Donald Trump violated to try to knock him off the ticket. That is totally fair game, but lying to Congress, well, there's got to be extenuating circumstances. Like, it was clear he lied to Congress, and there should be consequences. But I kind of feel bad for the guy, because everyone always lies to Congress. This was the norm in Washington. This was a thing you could do, and all of a sudden he's like, how was I supposed to know there would be consequences?
Everyone told me I could lie to Congress and there would be no problem with it.
I don't understand. So I do feel bad for Comey in that way, because suddenly there's consequences in Washington for the first time, and he's the unfortunate recipient of those consequences.
Well, he says, James Comey, in his response, that his heart is broken for the Department of Justice, but he has great confidence in the federal judicial system, and he says he's innocent, so he wants to have a trial and keep the faith. And he also says that he's known for years that there are costs to standing up to President Donald Trump. This isn't necessarily directly about President Trump. This is about all of the things that I just said, but him specifically doing something that you can't do. And it was important. This one was specifically important too, because if we have, directors of the FBI who are out there, again, not doing the job that they're supposed to do, but instead playing politics with all of this stuff. And by the way, knowing the whole time where this all originated. This originated, don't forget, from the Clinton campaign, right? You had the whole Steele dossier, all the backstory to that. It's so deep and it's so messy and it's so gross. But knowing what we know that he knew, he's the FBI director, perpetuating this and pushing it out there. I mean, at some point, yes, somebody has to be responsible and accountable for this. And you know what? Maybe it's coming down on him now, Amber. I don't know. The anniversary of Israel's October 7th, 2023 terrorist attack is upon us. On this date, the world will come together to honor the 1,200 souls murdered and remember those still held in captivity. A day to stand with family members whose grief is inconsolable. What happened 2 years ago also unleashed attacks on Jewish people everywhere. These anti-Semitic threats and deadly acts of violence are immense and constant. That's why the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews created Flags of Fellowship, now a growing movement. Flags of Fellowship is a bold way to stand up for what you believe, a way to tangibly support the people of Israel and Jews everywhere simply by planting an Israeli flag. You can join this historic movement by giving just $25 to help plant flags to support the Fellowship's work of saving and rebuilding lives in Israel and wherever God's people are in need. To learn more, visit ifcj.org. That's ifcj.org. Well, Dinesh D'Souza has done it again. His new eye-opening movie, The Dragon's Prophecy, illuminates a 3,000-year-old mystery about Israel, the dark resurrection, and the end of days. The nation of Israel is a resurrected nation, but what if there was going to be a resurrection of another people, an enemy of Israel? After the horrific attack on October 7th, The Dragon's Prophecy offers new understanding on Israel, radical Islam, anti-Semitism, and biblical prophecy. Could it be that the fate of the world, of all of humanity itself, is tied to what we're seeing happen in the Middle East? Based on the #1 international bestseller by Jonathan Cahn, The Dragon's Prophecy reveals how another realm could be transforming our world as we speak. Don't miss Dinesh D'Souza's new movie, The Dragon's Prophecy, in theaters 2 nights only, October 6th and 8th. Streaming and DVDs available October 9th. All tickets and pre-orders at thedragonsprophecyfilm.com. That's thedragonsprophecyfilm.com.
I had a similar reaction as Bethany when people were saying, well, Trump is weaponizing and politicizing the justice system. I'm like, well, what do you think the whole fake Russia hoax was? I mean, this is people being held accountable for politicization. And there were all of these mainstream media stories shortly before the charges were filed claiming that this whole thing was slapped together, that this was a rushed investigation, which turned out not to be true. Catherine Herridge has reporting on that. But it's very clear by the fact that the grand jury delivered this indictment so quickly. They actually only accepted 2 out of the 3 charges, that they were obviously deliberating fairly. This was not some partisan hack grand jury, and they were able to deliver that within a day. It's clear that this was not some botched, slapped together sort of fishing expedition against James Comey, who, by the way, I would add, early on in his career, he was involved in the prosecution of Martha Stewart for lying to federal officials. And he said publicly that the reason they had to move forward with this case was because they had to make an example out of her and show that you cannot lie to federal officials and get away with it without consequences. So I think he's actually just experiencing a little bit of poetic justice.
God, it really is. And, the president was asked about this, of course, immediately after people learned of this indictment. And he says it's about justice, really. It's not revenge. It's also about the fact that you can't let this go on. They are sick, radical left people, and they can't get away with it. And Comey was one of the people. He was the biggest. He wasn't the biggest, but he's a dirty cop. He's always been a dirty cop. Everybody knew it. I think that's right. I mean, like, and you have to stop it somewhere. Otherwise, it never ends. And I think it's so sad that so many people out there, when you bring up the FBI, the CIA, any of these, kind of three-letter agencies that we have out there, they have been so corrupted and they've been so damaged over the past several years that people don't trust them anymore. We should be able to trust the FBI, and that will only come with transparency and accountability. So maybe it starts with Comey, but then we also found out that there was a lot that the FBI was lying about as it related to January 6th. There were 274 FBI agents who were at the Capitol. By the way, like, so many of us tried to talk about, and we said, something's weird here. You had all these plainclothes officers there. We know it. Well, now we know it's true. Plainclothes agents were deployed to the Capitol. They had no safety gear. I think a lot of us wonder, what was their purpose there? What were they exactly supposed to be doing? I'm not totally sure. But this was something else that was kept from the American people, Bethany, that a lot of us said, wait a minute, we have questions. You guys are doing a whole thing on January 6th. We're going to take, my God, and the January 6th stuff, that whole group that they had put together, the televised, like, all the stuff, that it was made for TV nonsense. They wanted desperately for the American people to think that that was the most important thing that they were going to vote on in 2024. Turns out the American people didn't buy it, thank goodness. But now we're starting to see, wait a minute, there are a lot of holes in what we were told here. And one of those holes, turns out 274 FBI agents were actually at the Capitol that day, Bethany.
Yeah, I live in the swamp, and so I know a lot of people who work in this orbit. And what I've heard from folks is that anyone who was above board and who wanted to actually do their jobs stayed away from that whole situation as far as they could. And so, I mean, if you're thinking about the direction of the agency moving forward, to me, I'd want to know the identities of folks, because if there's a list that can be made of people who maybe should stay and maybe should continue the work that they were doing, and the people who used their office and used their positions as vehicles for their own political ideology, that could be a good starting list, is all I'm saying.
It could be. And by the way, some of the information we found out simultaneously, Amber, with this information about the agents who were there, was that there were a lot of complaints made during this period of time to the FBI from agents themselves, from people who worked within this agency, many of them saying, look, things are way too political here. Things are just out of control. I don't recognize this agency anymore. We got to rein things in a little bit. Here's an example of one of them. The FBI should make clear to its personnel and the public that despite its obvious political bias, the FBI's obvious political bias, that's not supposed to happen. It ultimately still takes its mission and priorities seriously. It should equally and aggressively investigate criminal activity regardless of the offender's perceived race, political affiliations, or motivations, and it should equally and aggressively protect all Americans regardless of perceived race, political affiliations, or motivations. Amber, that seems very basic to me, and yet it seems like these agents and these people who worked at the FBI were so concerned that it wasn't happening in the manner that we all expect it to happen. They had to file these complaints, and there are so many of them. You can just go down a list and read complaint after complaint that reflect those sentiments.
Well, I think the really obvious indicator of bias as it pertains to January 6th is look at how many people and how long the prosecutions went on for J6 compared to the summer of 2020 riots on the left wing. I mean, how many people realistically were prosecuted for smashing windows, attacking police officers? Very, very few. I mean, you could probably count them on one hand. And J6 was still going on effectively until Trump took office for his second term. In fact, one of the assistant attorneys in the Eastern District, which is now the district that is going after James Comey, was falsely smeared for being, quote unquote, involved in January 6th. A friend of mine I went to college with, her name's Maggie Cleary. She was falsely identified in a photograph as someone who was at the riot, and it very obviously was not her, looked nothing like her, but she still had federal agents show up to her home and grill her for hours, even as she provided receipts from her Target shopping day, her Peloton ride that she took at her house, like provided all of this evidence that she wasn't even there, but because someone who was on the left told a media outlet that this picture looked like her, she had to deal with this really aggressive questioning. And there's so many people like that who either weren't there that day, were there but not involved in rioting, people who even just walked through the Capitol, you know, once the earlier people had breached, who really had their lives destroyed in this process, while they got to watch people who really did engage with riots get off scot-free.
It is one of the most frustrating parts of it, and I actually go to a CrossFit gym here in Florida with some people who literally came to me. This was about 2 years ago. These people came to me and they said, look, my uncle and my cousin were at the Ellipse on January 6th, and they had nothing to do, kind of to your point, they had nothing to do with any of the destruction, with any of the stuff that happened there at the Capitol, but they were visited by, you know, I don't know if it was the FBI, I assume, who said, you know, here's what we're going to do. You guys can plead guilty to whatever terms we say. I don't know, some sort of destruction of property or something. Meanwhile, they didn't even go up on the Capitol steps, right? Or, you know, we're going to make life really hard for you. So either you say you did something that you didn't do, and we'll let you go on with your life, and you can, you know, serve the time served or whatever the agreement was. But that's how they got all of these people who they can say, look, all these people admitted they did something wrong. The way they went about this was absolutely disgraceful. I hope we get all of that information out. I hope all of these people are vindicated, because you're right. People had their lives destroyed. They lost their jobs. Families were broken up because of it. People didn't deserve that. Most of those people who were there on January 6th, I was physically in Washington, D.C. that day. That happens to be my husband's birthday, by the way, January 6th. And I stood up on stage and I had a crowd of like 100,000 people sing Eric Trump happy birthday. Most of those people were there because they loved America, because they were very disturbed with what they'd seen happen in our voting process, because they wanted to at least have one last time of seeing Donald Trump as president before, you know, Congress voted to certify the election that day. Most of them had great intentions, and they had their lives ruined anyway, because these people, there were a lot of dirty cops, to use.
And I was there that day too. I was there at the Ellipse speech, and to me, it was really shocking, because I left as soon as Trump finished speaking, and I went to have lunch with some friends. And when I saw what was happening on TV, I was shocked, because there was no indication from the thousands of people around me that there was some massive riot planned. There was obviously no, like, secret fomenting of this incident that was about to happen at the Capitol. There was no indication from anyone who spoke that day that anything like that was going to happen. And yet it turned into this narrative that all of these thousands of Trump supporters who were on the Ellipse were secretly conspiring to go break into the Capitol building, when to me that was just not the mood of the event at all.
It wasn't. It wasn't at all, which is why people want to know what those 274 agents were doing there. Because, I mean, by and large, Trump supporters are not there to, I know they weren't there to cause violence. Yeah, do you get a couple of bad apples in every bunch? Absolutely. And some of those people went too far, and some of those people did things that were wrong and illegal, and all of us wish they hadn't done. The bulk of the people there were there to be positive and celebratory and do nothing of the sort. And I agree, I was on an airplane taking off from DCA, from Reagan Airport, my husband and I, because we were flying back home. I had a birthday party planned for him later that day in New York, and we're taking off, and all these people are turning around in their seats, you know, Bethany going, oh, great job, guys, you guys ruined stuff. I'm like, what's going on? And of course we look on our phones and we're like, oh, this is awful, this is horrific. But I think we want to know what was happening with all those people. What was their goal? Because I don't know, the 274 FBI agents seems slightly excessive to me, but then again, maybe I don't know how many agents it takes. Just to move on quickly before we wrap things up here, Bethany, Jimmy Kimmel had an opportunity to come out and back on the air. We all know it. He got a couple of days vacation, and I thought he had an opportunity to do something that maybe could have been pretty big, even for Jimmy Kimmel. He could have come out, he could have apologized to Erica Kirk, the Kirk family, and really kind of tried to make amends and say, like, hey, what I said was wrong, and I am sorry for it. And any insinuation, like he tried to insinuate that, that, you know, somehow this guy who assassinated Charlie was connected to, you know, Donald Trump, his supporters, etc., was wrong, and I should have never done something like that. A man lost his life, period. It's unacceptable. He didn't do that, though, Bethany. He came out, there was a lot of crying. It seemed like he was more upset that he had been taken off the air than anything. And he said, I don't think the murderer who shot Charlie Kirk represents anyone. This is a sick person who believes violence is a solution, and it isn't. Well, no, we actually know the leanings of the guy who is supposedly the guy who killed Charlie Kirk. We know he had, you know, he had like trans messaging on there. We know the whole situation with him, and we know how he leans. I just thought that he had such an opportunity, and Jimmy Kimmel absolutely blew it.
I don't know if he blew it, because if you think about what he sees as his future, it is the voice of the left wing of America. That's why he has the viewership that he does, which was, I think it's like 68 cents a viewer or something like that when you factor in how much he's paid versus how many people are actually watching. More people watch this show than watch Jimmy Kimmel on a given normal night. I would bet my life on it. And so he's seeing two pathways, and he's seeing going totally political and anti-Trump, just as he's always done, or he can be a unifier. He can do the right thing, and he's decided through the course of his entire career that he wants to be political. And it reminds me a lot of sports journalists who spend all of their time talking about politics. It's the same with comedy now. They've all decided that comedy isn't fun, so they're just going to be political. But they're not funny, and they're not very insightful, and so they can't do either of those things well. But he's decided to double down on that. He became a household name and a hero for all of 15 minutes, and that was probably pretty exciting because no one had talked or thought about Jimmy Kimmel while he was on air for, 15 years, and all of a sudden he became a hero. And so it makes sense to me that he doubled down on that and decided not to do the decent thing, which was to acknowledge the fact that a husband and a father was shot in cold blood for the mere offense of exercising his free speech rights. Jimmy Kimmel was on brand. He's stayed on brand the whole time. And, let's fast forward 2 weeks and watch his numbers dip again.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm curious about, Amber, is where Jimmy and his show land after this. We saw Stephen Colbert. People aren't tuning in there. So he's done. Not that any of us cried any tears over that one, but, it really will be interesting to see. And I kind of feel like it'll be a reflection on where we are overall as a country in terms of whether or not Jimmy Kimmel maintains any sort of viewership and people still want to tune into that. He's a mean-spirited guy. That's the thing I don't like. You look at all the people he's had on his show over, the past several years. He has had twice someone who identifies as a Republican on his show over the past 6 years. And it was Mike Lindell, and it was to make fun of Mike Lindell. He's a mean-spirited guy. He said very nasty things about me, not based on my politics, based on how I look. If you can't do better than that, then I don't know what to say. I'm really curious to see where America lands on Jimmy Kimmel.
I completely agree about the mean-spiritedness, and that's why satire only works when there's some underlying level of respect for the person that you're making fun of. When it's just to be mean, it usually doesn't read as very funny. A lot of people were saying, oh my gosh, look at these numbers, these ratings for his first show back are amazing, but for me, it was like tuning in to watch a train wreck, right? None of those people are going to stick around. They just wanted to see what his response to the controversy was going to be. But there were three things that really stuck out to me. One was the complete lack of apology. 2 was the sobbing when he couldn't shed a tear for actually reporting the news of Charlie's assassination. He only cried because he was upset that people were mad at him for his initial reaction. And then the third thing is that he did not acknowledge that he has turned himself into a martyr for free speech, but not acknowledging that someone was actually killed for their speech. And one of those is actually way more consequential than the other. There was no indication that he understood the gravity of actually what happened to Charlie. So those 3 things, I think, are why people will tune out after this initial comeback, and he'll go back to the pre-Charlie horrible ratings, getting way overpaid for a show that doesn't make any money.
I'm just waiting for some of these networks to wise up, and maybe CBS seems to have taken note. I mean, it took them getting sued for $60 million by President Trump for their stunt with Kamala Harris and editing her interview back during, of course, the election last year. It took them a little while to figure it out, but I'm just waiting for a lot of them to wake up and realize that they're part of the problem too. They're perpetuating a lot of nasty, really awful stuff out there. But we'll see. Look, they say money talks, so we'll see if the ratings hold up. We'll see if people, the 68 cents per viewer, we'll see how it all pans out for him. Bethany and Amber, you guys are great. Thank you both for joining us here today for The Right View. To everybody at home, as always, make sure you like, subscribe, share, and follow. We'll see you back here next time for more of The Right View. And I won't back down.